Maya Rodriguez held the paper in her trembling hands, reading the numbers over and over, hoping they would somehow change. $847. That's what her textbooks would cost for just one semester. Her first semester of college. She sat on the edge of her dorm bed, that thin mattress that smelled like plastic and cleaning supplies, and did the math in her head. $800 was 2 months of her mother's car payments. It was 4 months of groceries for her little brother. It was more money than her family kept in their savings account at any given time. Maya had worked so hard to get here. 3 jobs during high school, staying up until midnight to finish homework after closing shifts at the diner. She'd written scholarship essays until her fingers cramped, describing her dreams in 1,000 different ways, hoping someone, anyone, would believe in her enough to help. And they had. She'd gotten a partial scholarship, taken out loans for the rest, and here she was, State University, the first person in her entire family to go to college. But nobody had mentioned the textbooks. Not really. Sure, people said textbooks were expensive, but $800 for books? Maya had thought maybe 100, maybe 200 total. She could have handled that. She'd been saving money from her summer job, proud of the $400 she'd managed to put away. She'd planned to use it for food, for emergencies, for those little things that come up when you're living away from home for the first time. Now she was looking at this list, and half her savings would be gone before she even attended her first class. She grabbed her laptop and started searching. Maybe she could find them cheaper online. She typed in the first book, Chemistry, Molecular Approach, 5th edition, $380 new. She found it used for $290. Her heart lifted a little, then sank again when she saw the shipping time. 3 weeks. Her first chemistry exam would be done by then. She needed the book on Monday. That was 3 days away. She tried the campus bookstore website. They had a rental option. That was something. She could rent the chemistry book for $150 instead of buying it. But there was a catch. She had to return it in perfect condition. No highlighting, no notes in the margins, nothing. How was she supposed to study from a book she couldn't even write in? Maya spent the entire weekend trying to figure it out. She called her mom, who listened quietly and then said what Maya already knew she would say. "Mia, I'm sorry. We just don't have it right now. Your father's truck needed new brakes last week and—" "I know, Mom, it's okay. I'll figure something out." But she didn't know how. Monday morning came too fast. Maya walked into her first chemistry class with a notebook and a pen, but no textbook. The professor, a tired-looking woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, started the lecture immediately. She referenced pages. Chapter 3, Section 2, Problem Sets on page 94. Maya wrote down the page numbers, but what good did that do? She couldn't read pages she didn't have. After class, she approached a girl who'd been sitting next to her. "Hey, I'm still waiting for my book to arrive. Could I maybe take a quick picture of the homework problems?" The girl looked uncomfortable. I guess? But there's like 20 problems. That's going to take a while, and I have another class in 10 minutes. Just a quick photo. I promise." The girl sighed and opened her book, holding it at an awkward angle while Maya snapped photos with her phone. The pictures came out blurry. The equations were barely readable. But it was better than nothing. This became Maya's routine. She'd ask classmates if she could photograph pages. Some were nice about it. Others made excuses, suddenly remembering they had somewhere to be. She couldn't blame them. It was awkward, uncomfortable. She felt like she was begging for something that everyone else had a right to. The library became her second home. She'd race there after every class, hoping to grab one of the 2 chemistry textbooks they kept on reserve. But everyone had the same idea. There was actually a waiting list. Students could check out reserved textbooks for 2 hours at a time, and there were always 5 or 6 people ahead of her. When she finally got her hands on one, she'd photograph page after page, her phone's storage filling up with blurry images of chemical equations and molecular diagrams. She'd try to read from her phone screen later, squinting at the small text zooming in and out, losing her place. Her eyes hurt, her head hurt, and she was falling behind. In economics class, it was worse. The professor moved quickly, assuming everyone had done the reading. "As you saw in Chapter 7, he'd say, and Maya would panic because she hadn't seen Chapter 7. She didn't even know what Chapter 7 was about. She'd tried to share a book with another student, a guy named Tom, who seemed friendly enough. But Tom needed the book on Tuesdays and Thursdays. and Maya needed it on Mondays and Wednesdays, and there was overlap and confusion. And eventually Tom just stopped responding to her texts. 3 weeks into the semester, Maya was surviving on scraps. Borrowed notes, photographed pages, 5-minute sessions with library textbooks. She'd pieced together what she could, but she was missing so much. Context, examples, practice problems, all the things textbooks were supposed to provide. She'd see other students in the coffee shop, their expensive textbooks spread out on the table, highlighting passages in neat yellow lines, sticky notes marking important pages. They'd flip back and forth easily, checking previous chapters, reviewing concepts. Maya watched them with a mixture of envy and frustration. They probably didn't even realize how lucky they were. To them, textbooks were just another school supply, like pencils or notebooks. An annoyance, maybe. An expense their parents complained about but ultimately paid for. For Maya, textbooks were a barrier. A wall between her and the education she'd worked so hard to access. She'd gotten into college on merit, on hard work, on intelligence. But none of that mattered if she couldn't even access the basic materials needed to learn. Late one night, exhausted from another day of scraping together information, Maya sat in her dorm room and cried. She thought about calling home, about telling her parents that maybe college wasn't for her, that maybe she should just come back and get a full-time job like her cousins had done. At least then she wouldn't feel like she was constantly failing at something that seemed so easy for everyone else. But she didn't make that call. Instead, she wiped her eyes, opened her laptop, and started searching again. There had to be another way. There had to be something she was missing, some solution that didn't require hundreds of dollars she didn't have. She just had no idea yet what that solution might be. The email arrived on a Wednesday morning. Maya saw it while walking to her chemistry class, and she stopped right there in the middle of the sidewalk. Students flowing around her like water around a rock. Grade posted for exam, 147, 147%. She'd failed. Actually failed her first college exam. Maya felt her chest tighten. She'd never failed a test in her life. Not in high school, not in middle school, not ever. She'd been the student teachers used as an example. The one who always had her hand up, who always knew the answer. And now, 5 weeks into college, she was failing. She knew why, of course. The exam had covered 4 chapters from the textbook she'd never fully read. She'd pieced together what she could from her blurry phone photos and hurried library sessions, but there were gaps. Big gaps. Questions about concepts she'd never even heard of because she'd missed those pages. Or those pages had been too blurry to read. Or someone had been waiting for the library book, so she'd had to rush. Maya didn't go to chemistry that day. She couldn't face it. Instead, she walked to the student center and sat in the back corner of the cafeteria, her coffee getting cold while she stared at nothing. She thought about calling her mom again. But what would she say? Hey, Mom, remember how proud you were when I got into college? Well, I'm failing because I can't afford books. Her mother would blame herself, would try to send money they didn't have, would work extra hours cleaning houses until her hands cracked and bled. No. Maya couldn't do that to her. She had to figure this out herself. The cafeteria was quiet in the mid-afternoon. Most students were in class, but there were a few scattered around, studying or killing time between lectures. Maya watched them without really meaning to. It was something to do besides think about her failed exam. At the table next to her, a guy was explaining organic chemistry to 2 other students. He had a napkin, and he was drawing on it with a pen, sketching out molecular structures. See, it's not that complicated, he was saying. The textbook makes it sound impossible, but really it's just about electrons wanting to be stable. Think of them like people at a party trying to find someone to talk to. One of the students laughed. That actually makes sense. Why doesn't the textbook explain it like that? Because textbooks are written by people who already understand everything. They forget what it's like to see this stuff for the first time. Maya found herself leaning closer, listening. The guy kept explaining, his napkin filling up with drawings and arrows and little notes. He made it clear. Simple. In 5 minutes on a napkin, he'd explained something that had confused Maya for weeks. She looked around the cafeteria with new eyes. Across the room, 3 students had their laptops out, working on an economics problem together. They were arguing about supply curves, each person offering a different explanation, until suddenly one of them said, "Oh, wait, I get it now." and explained it in a way that made the others nod in understanding. Near the windows, two girls were quizzing each other with homemade flashcards, cards they'd obviously made themselves, written in colorful pens with little drawings and memory tricks. It hit Maya all at once, so obvious she almost laughed. Students were teaching each other. Right here, right now, all around her. They were taking complicated textbook information and translating it into language that actually made sense. They were creating their own study materials, their own explanations, their own ways of understanding, and they were doing it for free. What if, Maya thought, what if there was a way to organize this? What if instead of every student making their own flashcards, their own notes, their own napkin drawings that got thrown away after one study session, what if they could share them, not illegally copying textbooks, but creating their own resources and sharing them with each other? The idea was small at first, just a whisper, but it grew louder in her head. A website, maybe. A place where students could upload their notes, their study guides, their simplified explanations. Everyone contributing what they understood best. Everyone benefiting from everyone else's knowledge. Maya opened her laptop right there in the cafeteria and started searching. Did something like this exist already? She found study websites, but they were trying to sell premium subscriptions. She found note-sharing sites, but they were cluttered and confusing, or they were clearly hosting pirated textbook PDFs that could get students in trouble. Nothing was quite what she was imagining. Nothing was made by students for students, with the specific goal of making learning accessible to people who couldn't afford the official materials. She spent the rest of the afternoon there, her failed chemistry exam temporarily forgotten. She had no idea how to build a website, but that was a problem for later. First, she needed to understand if this idea could actually work. That evening, Maya went back to her dorm and started asking questions. She posted in the freshman group chat, "How many of you are struggling to afford textbooks?" The responses came fast. Out of 50 students in the chat, 32 replied within an hour. Most of them had similar stories to hers. Working multiple jobs, taking out extra loans, sharing books with roommates, going without. What if we could share study materials legally? Maya typed. Not pirated textbooks, but our own notes and explanations? The responses were enthusiastic. I'd totally contribute. That would be amazing. Can we start this like tomorrow? Maya stayed up until 3 in the morning that night, researching how to build a website. She'd never coded before. She'd barely passed her high school computer class. But she started with the basics, watching free YouTube tutorials, reading articles, taking notes. It was overwhelming at first, all this new language, all these terms she didn't understand. But she kept thinking about that napkin in the cafeteria, about how one student had made chemistry make sense in 5 minutes. If he could do that with molecules, she could learn this. Over the next few days, Maya fell into a new rhythm. She'd go to classes, take detailed notes, then spend her evenings learning to code. She worked the late shift at the campus bookstore, which was ironic because she spent 8 hours surrounded by the expensive textbooks she couldn't afford. But the job paid $9 an hour, and it was quiet enough that she could study coding on her phone during slow periods. Her manager, a middle-aged woman named Patricia who'd worked there for 15 years, caught her once. Maya thought she was in trouble, but Patricia just looked at her screen and said, "Teaching yourself web design?" "Yeah, I'm trying to build something." Patricia nodded slowly. "You know, I've watched textbook prices triple in the time I've worked here. Used to feel good about this job helping students. Now I mostly feel like I'm part of the problem. Whatever you're building, I hope it works." 3 weeks after her failed chemistry exam, Maya had a basic website. It was ugly. The colors were wrong and it loaded slowly. And half the features she wanted didn't work yet. But it functioned. Students could create accounts, upload documents, and search for study materials by course. She called it Study Hive, because she imagined students all working together like bees, everyone contributing, everyone benefiting from the collective work. She posted the link in 3 different group chats with a simple message: free study materials made by students for students. Upload what you've got, use what you need. Let's help each other out. Then she went to bed exhausted, not expecting much. When she woke up the next morning, 12 students had created accounts. It wasn't viral or anything close, but it was 12 people who believed in the idea enough to try. 12 people who'd taken time to upload their notes, their study guides, their own explanations of difficult concepts. Maya logged in and found that someone had uploaded a chemistry study guide. She opened it, and there, Explained in simple language with helpful diagrams were the concepts she'd struggled with, the concepts that had been on her failed exam. She sat there staring at her laptop screen, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something that wasn't stress or fear or exhaustion. She felt hope. Maya's alarm went off at 5 in the morning, just like it had every day for the past 3 months. She rolled out of bed in the dark, careful not to wake her roommate, and pulled on the same hoodie she'd been wearing all week. Coffee first. Always coffee first, Study Hive had grown. Not overnight, not in some magical explosion of success like you see in movies, but slowly, steadily, one student at a time. What started with 12 users was now over 200. Students from her chemistry class, her economics class, and classes she wasn't even in. People were finding it somehow, sharing the link, telling their friends. The problem was that Maya was now running a website while also trying to be a full-time student. And it turned out that running a website was basically a full-time job all by itself. Every morning started the same way. Check the site for problems. Answer messages from students who couldn't figure out how to upload files. Fix broken links. Review new uploads to make sure nobody was posting actual copyrighted textbook pages, which would get everyone in trouble. Then, and only then, could she think about her own homework. She was getting maybe 4 hours of sleep a night. Her grades had actually gone up since she started Study Hive, because now she had access to good study materials. But she was exhausted all the time. Her eyes hurt from staring at screens. She'd developed this constant headache that lived right behind her forehead. And she'd started having these weird moments where she'd forget what she was doing mid-sentence. But students kept joining, and every time Maya thought about giving up, about taking the site down and just focusing on her own survival, she'd get a message that would change her mind, like the one from Luis, a sophomore who'd written, "I'm working 40 hours a week to pay for school. I don't have time to go to office hours or study groups. Your site is the only reason I'm passing physics right now. Thank you." Or the one from Jennifer, "My financial aid didn't cover books. I was about to drop out. Found Study Hive and stayed. You probably saved my college career." These messages kept her going, but they also added pressure. Students were depending on this thing she'd built in her dorm room. She couldn't let it fail. She couldn't let them down. The website kept crashing. That was the main problem. Maya's coding skills were amateur at best, held together with hope and YouTube tutorials. When too many people tried to access Study Hive at the same time, especially during midterms or finals, the whole thing would just stop working. She'd get dozens of panicked messages. "The site is down. I need to access my notes. Is everything okay?" And Maya would be there at 2 in the morning trying to figure out what went wrong. Googling error codes, watching more tutorials, fixing things line by line in code she barely understood. She'd get it working again, and everyone would be grateful, and then a week later it would crash again for a completely different reason. Money was becoming an issue too. Running a website cost actual money. Server fees, domain name, storage space for all the files students were uploading. Maya had been paying for it out of her own pocket, using money from her bookstore job. But the site was growing faster than her paychecks could keep up with. She'd started the month with the server costing $30. Now it was up to $60, and next month the hosting company said it would be $90 because of all the traffic. She tried to ignore it, tried to just work more hours, but there was a limit to how many hours existed in a day. She was already working 20 hours a week at the bookstore, taking a full course load and spending another 20 hours maintaining Study Hive. Something had to give. Her roommate, Christina, found her crying one night. Maya had been trying to be quiet about it, but apparently she hadn't been quiet enough. "Hey, what's wrong?" Christina sat down on Maya's bed, concern in her voice. "Nothing. I'm fine. Just tired. You're always tired, and you're always on that website. What's going on?" So Maya told her. About the crashes, about the costs, about how she was failing at juggling everything, about how she wanted to keep helping people but didn't know if she could afford to. Literally and figuratively. Christina listened, and then she said something Maya hadn't expected. "You need help. You can't do this alone. I can't pay anyone. I can barely afford to keep the site running. So don't pay them. You built this whole thing on the idea of students helping students, right? Ask for help." It seemed so obvious once Christina said it. Maya had been so focused on maintaining everything herself that she'd forgotten her own philosophy. Study Hive worked because students contributed. Why couldn't that apply to building the site too? The next day, Maya posted a message on StudyHive. "Hey everyone, I need help. The site keeps crashing and I'm struggling to fix it alone. If anyone knows coding, web design, or server management, please message me. I can't pay you, but you'd be helping hundreds of students access free education." She got 3 responses within an hour. By the end of the day, 7 students had volunteered. There was Wei, a computer science major who took one look at Maya's code and very gently said, "I think I can optimize this." There was Priya, who knew about databases and could help organize all the uploaded files better. And there was David, who'd actually worked IT support over the summer and understood servers. They met in the library that weekend, all of them crammed around one table with their laptops. Maya had been nervous. These were real computer science students, and she was just someone who'd taught herself enough code to build something functional, but messy. She was sure they'd judge her, tell her everything she'd done wrong. Instead, Wei looked at her work and said, "This is really impressive for someone self-taught. You've got some clever solutions here." "Really? Because it crashes all the time." "Yeah, but that's a scale problem, not a skill problem. You built this for 12 people and now 200 people are using it. We just need to rebuild some parts to handle the traffic." They worked for 6 hours that day. Wei rewrote major sections of code, explaining what he was doing so Maya could learn. Priya reorganized the database structure. David researched cheaper hosting options and found a company that offered discounts for educational projects. By the end of the weekend, StudyHive was running faster than it ever had. The crashes stopped. Upload times improved, and Maya had learned more about coding in 3 days than she had in 3 months of solo tutorials. But more than that, she wasn't alone anymore. She had a team. Small, informal, unpaid, but a team nonetheless. People who believed in what she was building enough to give their time freely. Word kept spreading. A professor in the education department heard about StudyHive and mentioned it in class as an example of peer learning. Students from that class joined. They told friends. Those friends told other friends. By November, there were 500 users. The study materials kept improving too. Students weren't just uploading their regular notes anymore. They were creating comprehensive study guides specifically for the site. Visual learners made diagrams and charts. Students who were good at explaining things wrote step-by-step breakdowns of complicated concepts. Some people even started making video tutorials, short clips where they explained a single topic clearly and simply, then linked to them from StudyHive. Maya watched it all happen with this feeling of amazement. She'd built a basic platform, sure, but the students had turned it into something so much more than she'd imagined. They'd created a whole ecosystem of learning, everyone teaching everyone else, knowledge flowing freely in every direction. Her chemistry grade had gone from failing to a B+. Her economics grade was even better. She was sleeping more now that she had help with the website, 5 hours a night instead of 4. It wasn't great, but it was progress. One afternoon in early December, Maya was in the campus coffee shop when she overheard 2 students talking at the next table. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but they were talking about StudyHive. "Yeah, it saved me so much money," one of them said. "I literally haven't bought a textbook all semester." The other student nodded. "Same. My parents were so confused when I told them I didn't need book money. They were sure I was lying." Maya smiled into her coffee. This was exactly what she'd wanted. Students helping students. Knowledge accessible to everyone, not just people who could afford it. She had no idea that everything was about to get much more complicated. The email came from an address Maya didn't recognize. Subject line: Urgent. StudyHive legal concern. Her stomach dropped before she even opened it. It was from the Dean of Students' office. They wanted to meet with her. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Please confirm your availability. Maya read it 3 times, her heart pounding harder each time. This was it. She was in trouble. She'd known this might happen eventually, but somehow she'd convinced herself that if she just kept helping students, if she just kept everything legal and above board, she'd be okay. She showed up to the dean's office 15 minutes early, because that's what you do when you're terrified. The secretary told her to wait. Maya sat in one of those uncomfortable chairs that every administrative office seems to have. watching the clock on the wall tick forward with painful slowness. When they finally called her in, there were 3 people in the room. Dean Martinez, a woman Maya had only seen in welcome emails. Mr. Holloway from the campus bookstore, looking uncomfortable in a suit that seemed too tight. And a third person, who introduced himself as legal counsel for the university. Maya's hands started shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs so no one would notice. "Maya," Dean Martinez began, her voice neutral in a way that could mean anything. "We've been hearing a lot about this website you've created. Study Hive." "Yes, ma'am." "Can you tell us about it?" So Maya did. She explained how she couldn't afford textbooks, how she'd noticed students helping each other, how she'd built a platform for sharing student-created study materials. She tried to keep her voice steady, tried to sound confident and professional instead of like a scared teenager who was pretty sure her college career was about to end. "And you're not sharing copyrighted materials?" the lawyer asked. "No textbook PDFs, no scanned pages?" "No, sir. It's all original content created by students. Notes, study guides, explanations. I review everything that gets uploaded. If I see anything that looks like it might be copyrighted material, I take it down immediately." Mr. Holloway from the bookstore cleared his throat. "The issue, Miss Rodriguez, is that textbook sales have dropped significantly this semester, 23% down from last year. We believe your website is directly impacting our business." "I'm sorry," Maya said, and she meant it. She liked Patricia and some of the other people who worked there. "But students can't afford the books. I couldn't afford them. We're just helping each other learn. By encouraging students not to purchase required course materials. By creating our own materials, that's not illegal. Students have always shared notes and studied together. I just made it easier." The dean raised her hand, stopping the argument before it could escalate. "Mr. Holloway, I understand your concerns. But Maya is correct that students have a right to create and share their own educational materials." She turned to Maya. "However, we need to make sure this doesn't violate academic integrity policies. Some faculty have expressed concern that your site might facilitate cheating." "Cheating?" Maya felt anger flash through her fear. "We're not sharing answers to homework or exams. We're sharing explanations of concepts, study strategies. It's no different than a study group." "It is different," the lawyer interjected, "because it's permanent and accessible to everyone. A study group is temporary, limited to who's in the room. Your site creates a permanent repository of course-specific materials that could potentially include homework solutions or previous exam questions." Maya's mind raced. "I could add rules. Make it clear that homework answers and exam questions aren't allowed. I already moderate uploads. I could moderate even more carefully." Dean Martinez leaned back in her chair, studying Maya. "How many students are using this site?" "Around 500 last time I checked. From our campus and 2 others nearby. 500 students who found an alternative to purchasing textbooks." Mr. Holloway's tone made it sound like an accusation. 500 students who couldn't afford textbooks finding a way to stay in school. Maya shot back. She was tired of being polite. Tired of apologizing for helping people. "With respect, sir, your bookstore isn't losing customers. You never had us as customers. We're the students who were going without, who were failing classes because we couldn't access the materials. We weren't buying books before and we're not buying books now. The difference is that now we're actually learning." The room went quiet. Maya's pulse was hammering in her ears. She'd probably just made everything worse, but she couldn't take it back now. Dean Martinez looked at the lawyer, then at Mr. Holloway, then back at Maya. "Give us a moment," she said. "Please wait outside." Maya sat in that uncomfortable chair for 20 minutes. She thought about calling her mom but didn't know what she'd say. "Hey, I might be getting kicked out of college for trying to help people." That would go over great. When they called her back in, Dean Martinez's expression was unreadable. "Here's what we've decided. You may continue operating Study Hive with conditions. First, you'll work with our legal team to create clear terms of service that prohibit academic dishonesty. Second, you'll implement a reporting system so professors can flag materials they believe violate their course policies. Third, we want monthly reports on the site's usage and content." Maya nodded, relief flooding through her. "Yes, absolutely, I can do all of that. And one more thing. We're going to be watching this closely. If we receive complaints from faculty about academic integrity issues, if we find evidence of cheating facilitated by your platform, we will shut it down immediately. And there could be disciplinary action for you personally. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. I understand. Maya walked out of that office feeling like she'd just survived something. She wasn't shut down. She could keep going, but now there were eyes on her, people waiting for her to fail, ready to pounce on any mistake. She called an emergency meeting with her volunteer team that night. They met in Way's dorm because his roommate was gone for the week. Maya explained everything that had happened. So we need to be even more careful, she concluded. No homework answers, no exam questions, nothing that could be considered cheating. Just study materials and concept explanations. Priya frowned. How do we define the line? If someone explains how to solve a certain type of problem, is that allowed? I think so, David said. That's teaching, not cheating. Like a tutor explaining a concept. But what if that explanation is basically the answer to a homework problem? Way asked. They spent hours debating it, trying to create clear guidelines that would protect StudyHive while still helping students learn. It was harder than Maya had expected. Education lived in gray areas. What counted as legitimate help versus inappropriate assistance wasn't always clear, but they figured it out. They created a new set of rules for the site, clear and specific. No posting of specific homework problems or exam questions. No solutions to assigned work. Yes to explanations of concepts, sample problems with solutions, study strategies, and breakdowns of how to approach certain types of questions. Maya updated the site with the new rules and sent a message to all users explaining the changes. Most people understood and supported it. A few complained, said she was being too strict, that they needed help with homework. Maya stood firm. StudyHive was about learning, not cheating. If they didn't like it, they could leave. 3 days after the dean's office meeting, Maya got another email. This one was from a publishing company. A big one, the kind that printed half the textbooks in her chemistry class. The subject line read, "Cease and desist notice, studyhive.com." Maya's hands went cold as she clicked it open. The email was full of legal language she barely understood, but the message was clear enough. The publisher claimed that StudyHive was facilitating copyright infringement and harming their business. They demanded she shut down the site within 14 days, or they would pursue legal action. Maya sat in front of her laptop, reading the email over and over, feeling everything she'd built start to crumble. She'd survived the dean's office. She'd created rules and guidelines. She'd tried so hard to do everything right, and now this, a publishing company with lawyers and money and power, coming after a college student who'd just been trying to help her classmates afford an education. She thought about giving up, about shutting down StudyHive before things got worse, before she ended up with legal problems she couldn't handle. It would be easier, simpler, safer. But then she thought about Luis, working 40 hours a week, depending on StudyHive to pass physics. About Jennifer, who'd almost dropped out until she found the site. About the 500 students who were accessing education they couldn't otherwise afford. Maya closed the email and opened a new browser tab. She typed, "How to fight a cease and desist letter when you're broke." If they wanted to shut her down, she wasn't going to make it easy. Maya spent 3 days reading everything she could find about copyright law, fair use, and educational resources. Her eyes burned from staring at legal documents she could barely understand. She made pages of notes, trying to figure out if she had any chance of fighting back against a publishing company that probably had more lawyers than her entire campus had students. The answer she kept finding was the same. She needed a real lawyer, and lawyers cost money she didn't have. She was sitting in the library, drowning in legal articles, when Professor Chen found her. He taught Introduction to Education Policy, a class Maya wasn't even in. But he'd heard about StudyHive from his students. "Maya Rodriguez?" he asked, standing by her table. She looked up, exhausted. "Yes? I'm Professor Chen. Do you have a minute to talk?" Maya almost said no. She had 14 days before the publisher's deadline, and she was nowhere close to figuring out what to do. But something in his expression made her pause. He didn't look angry or accusatory. He looked concerned. "Sure," she said. Professor Chen sat down and got straight to the point. "I heard you received a cease and desist letter from Meridian Publishing. Is that true? How did you—" Academia is a small world, especially when it comes to education access issues. I've been following what you built with StudyHive. It's impressive, and I think what they're doing is wrong. Maya felt her throat tighten. She'd been holding everything together for days, staying strong, staying focused. But here was a professor, someone with authority and experience, saying she wasn't crazy for fighting this. It almost broke her. I don't know what to do, she admitted. I can't afford a lawyer, and I'm pretty sure I can't fight a huge publishing company on my own. You're not on your own. Professor Chen pulled out his phone and scrolled through something. I work with an organization called the Educational Freedom Foundation. We focus on education access and open learning resources. We've dealt with publishers trying to shut down student initiatives before, and we have lawyers who work pro bono for cases like this. Maya stared at him. Pro bono. That means free? It means they believe in the cause enough to work for free, yes. If you're interested, I can connect you with them. They'd need to review your case, but from what I understand, StudyHive isn't violating copyright. You're hosting student-created content, which is protected speech. For the first time in days, Maya felt like she could breathe properly. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Professor Chen smiled. Because I was you 30 years ago. I couldn't afford textbooks either. I nearly dropped out because of it. Education shouldn't be something only wealthy people can access. What you're doing matters. The Educational Freedom Foundation took her case. Their lawyer, a woman named Rita who wore bright red glasses and had a no-nonsense way of talking, reviewed everything about StudyHive in detail. She looked at the terms of service, examined uploaded content, analyzed the cease and desist letter. After 2 days, she called Maya with her conclusion. They don't have a case. You're not hosting copyrighted material. You're hosting student speech and original educational content. That's protected. They're trying to scare you into shutting down because you're hurting their profits, but legally, they can't force you to. So what do? We call their bluff. We send a response letter explaining exactly why they're wrong, and we tell them if they want to pursue this, they can take you to court. But they won't. Cases like this are bad publicity for publishers, and they almost never win. Rita was right. 2 weeks after she sent the response letter, the publishing company backed down. No apology, no acknowledgement that they'd been wrong. They just went quiet, and the threat disappeared like it had never existed. Maya wanted to celebrate, but she was too tired. The stress of those weeks had worn her down to nothing. She'd barely slept, barely eaten, just survived on coffee and anxiety, while trying to keep StudyHive running and stay current in her classes. But she'd won. StudyHive survived. The story got out, as stories do. A student journalist for the campus newspaper wrote an article about it. Student fights publisher wins. Local news picked it up. Then regional news. Suddenly people were talking about textbook costs and education access and whether publishers had too much power over students. StudyHive exploded, not just her campus anymore. Students from universities across the state started joining, then across the country. By the end of Maya's sophomore year, there were over 5,000 users. Professor Chen connected her with other people working on education access. Rita introduced her to a nonprofit foundation focused on educational equity. They offered Maya a grant. Not huge money, but enough to upgrade StudyHive's servers. Enough to maybe hire someone part-time to help with moderation. Enough to prove that what she'd built mattered to people beyond just her campus. The foundation flew Maya to a conference on education innovation. She'd never been on a plane before. She'd barely been outside her home state. And now she was standing on a stage in front of 200 people, telling her story. She talked about being unable to afford textbooks, about building StudyHive in her dorm room with coding skills learned from YouTube, about students helping students, knowledge flowing freely, education becoming accessible regardless of income. When she finished, people stood up and clapped. Some of them were crying. After the panel, a dozen people came up to talk to her. Other students building similar things. Professors who wanted to support open education. Parents who'd watched their kids struggle with textbook costs and felt powerless to help. A woman in her 50s grabbed Maya's hand and said, "My daughter dropped out because she couldn't afford books. She was so smart, but we just didn't have the money. What you're doing would have saved her college career. Thank you." That's when it really hit Maya. This wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't even just about the students currently using StudyHive. It was about changing how education worked, about proving that knowledge didn't have to cost hundreds of dollars, that students could teach each other and learn together without corporations controlling access to information. The foundation offered her a job. A real job with a salary and benefits. They wanted her to run Study Hive full-time, to grow it into something even bigger, to help build a movement around free, student-created educational resources. Maya took a semester off to focus on it. Her mother cried when she told her, worried that leaving school meant giving up on her degree. But Maya promised she'd go back and finish. This was just temporary, just until Study Hive was stable enough to run without her constant attention. She hired a small team. Wei, who'd helped rebuild the site, came on as lead developer. Priya managed the database and content organization. David handled community moderation and user support. They worked out of a cramped office space the foundation provided. 4 desks crammed into a room that had probably been a storage closet before. But they were building something real, something that mattered. By the time Maya was ready to return to school to finish her degree, Study Hive had grown beyond anything she'd imagined that night in the cafeteria when she'd first had the idea. Over 20,000 students using it. Partnerships with 5 universities. Media coverage in major outlets talking about the rising cost of education and how students were fighting back. She got emails every day from students she'd never met. People telling her that Study Hive saved them from dropping out, that it made the difference between failing and passing, that it gave them hope when the system felt designed to make them fail. Those messages kept her going through the hard days, through server crashes and funding stress and the constant pressure of running something that so many people depended on. Maya walked across the graduation stage 3 years after starting Study Hive, accepting her diploma with Wei and Priya and Christina and her mother crying in the audience. She'd done it. First person in her family to graduate college. And she'd done it while building something that would help thousands of other students do the same. After the ceremony, a freshman approached her, nervous, shy, clearly working up courage to speak. "Are you Maya Rodriguez, the one who started Study Hive?" "Yeah, that's me." The girl smiled, relief flooding her face. "I just wanted to say thank you. I couldn't afford textbooks this semester. I was going to drop out, but I found your site and I'm staying. I'm going to make it. Because of what you built." Maya hugged her. This stranger who was living the exact same story Maya had lived 4 years ago, the story that had started everything. "You're going to do great," Maya said, "and if you ever need help, we're here." That's what we do. We help each other. She meant it. That's what Study Hive had always been about from that first day in the cafeteria. Students helping students, knowledge shared freely, education accessible to everyone, not just the people who could afford it. Maya couldn't afford textbooks, so she'd invented a better way to learn. And in doing so, she'd proved that sometimes the best solutions to broken systems come from the people who are suffering under them. That change doesn't always come from the top down. Sometimes it comes from a broke college student with an idea and the stubborn refusal to give up. Sometimes it starts with someone who simply refuses to accept that education should only belong to the wealthy.